Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Fire Emblem, Crimson Flower in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 26, Orange Sunset. The first week's Friday of the Garland Moon had approached. Despite all that had happened, Petra and Casper had still attended their lessons. In being seated beside one another, the aura around them had grown awkward. Regardless of their environment, they had both wanted to learn from their teacher. Still though, both Petra and Casper had made a subconscious effort to ignore each other without realization. Okay, class, later this week I will be booking some battalions for our class most elite students to use. Whilst I expect everyone to slowly grow into commanding their own platoon, that will come in due time. As Byleth said this, many in the class had looked towards their house leader, expecting that she would be given the task at hand. I will be ordering 2 battalions for this month's mission. As such, I have already picked Edelgard to command one of them, and the other is yet to be decided. From the faces given by each of the students, Billet could easily tell who had wanted the opportunity, and who had resented. It was obvious from a simple glance that Hubert, Casper, Petra, and Ferdinand were readily motivated to work hard for this opportunity. Judging from how Dorothea reacted, Billet assumed she was the student who would not mind if they were responsible for such a task. Finally, Bernadetta and Linhard had already looked away from Byleth, which was a clear sign they dreaded this eventuality. Just in case, Billet interrupted her brother. Does anyone fully know what a battalion is? A few had raised their hands, however Billet decided to pick on someone who had not. Dorothea, what do you think battalions are? Byleth had not liked being objected to in the middle of his lecture, however he let the class continue. Seeing how Billet carried her cheerful aura, he decided to let her take over for a small amount of time. Well, aren't they just a handful of mercenaries we command? The nod from Billet had hinted that Dorothea needed to answer with more details. Well, I mean, they basically help us in battle. If I recall, they're like a group of soldiers that fight alongside us as a group, I think. That is correct, Byleth answered. He began to walk towards the center of the desk. Whenever he behaved this way, everyone knew he was geared to tell something important to the class. Our monthly missions can be unpredictable. As much as the church tries to gather intel for us beforehand, history has proved that not all of our assignments are truly safe for a class of students to tackle. Battalions are voluntary groups that help in times of urgency. As Dorothea stated, their company allows for a simulation of a mercenary lifestyle, allowing you all to gain authority and leadership skills when commanding them. They are there to assist in times of need, and have strong ties to the church. Every month or so, they are able to work with us in order to help us complete our missions. Depending on who I see fit, I will assign different battalions that correspond to your nature. For now, I have booked for the usage of 2 attack-styled battalions. Battalions had sounded far more valuable than they had originally seemed. As the class thought more about the idea, some of the students had begun looking forward to the idea of commanding their own fleet. With that settled, Billet gleaned. I think you're safe to continue the lecture, brother. Byleth looked towards his sister, and carried out as she suggested. It was clear that the siblings had both accounted for one another's weaknesses, and as such, they were an unstoppable force of education. As Byleth took out a chalk to scrape along the board, he looked onto the class with the expectation of them getting out their notebooks. As with yesterday, we will go through our last theoretical construction to look into before announcing what is to come in a few weeks. As a few of the students had groaned, Byleth ignored this and carried forward his lecture. This is our most complicated one so far, unfortunately. As such, I want anyone who has further questions to quiz sister on it if you are confused. Billet waved when hearing her name. Don't worry. This was totally not my strong suit years ago. It's fine to struggle at first. In annoyance of being interrupted, Byleth coughed, signaling his sister to hush her voice. After finally gaining the class attention, he spoke once more. Indeed, what he was going to tell the class would be a concept manufactured long ago. Legends and old folk tales had used this concept, and as such, it had been outdated over time. Regardless, the Academy had still assigned the fabled triangle concept as part of the curriculum, so it had to be taught regardless. Lances beat sword, swords beat axes, and an axe can beat a lance in combat. Raise your hand if you have heard this concept. Few had done so when asked this question, so Byleth continued. Some have argued that this concept has weakened in solidity, stating that it is down to the user's skills when put into a fight. If we were to also mix certain classes, such as mages and flyers, this theory gets more complicated over time. Still, it has occasionally shown its worth, and every unit that is part of the Knights of Sirios have been drilled on this topic. The idea of a lance beating a sword is fairly standard. The lance is a weapon of great length. When pitted against an unknowing sword user, a lance combatant can easily disarm their foe with little effort. As for swords, they are seen as a quick and easy method of making fast attacks. Even those without proper speed and athletic abilities are able to swing most swords with ease, and as such, they are able to beat that of the heavy axe. Finally, the triangle concept ends with an axe beating a lance. Whilst a lance is faster and lighter, they fail to combat the sheer might that is the power of an axe. As stated before, this triangle is an old concept, however it has still saved more lives than you may expect. Regardless of its unknown origins, it is an incredibly useful thesis to bring up upon your written tasks, and many have gathered high grades with it. Despite its complicated nature, I would like everyone to learn it by the end of next month as your homework assignment. It was clear this concept was still confusing the minds of the students. Byleth had drawn out a diagram on the chalkboard to aid the students' understanding, and soon enough the sounds of scribbles could be heard from the students. As they continued writing, Byleth had approached her brother and whispered in secret. "Should I start the cleanup operation now or later?" "Cleanup? Oh, that's my way of saying how I'm picking up your messes," Byleth joked. "I've got a lot of clarifying to do later. I am not always good with simplifying certain subjects. I shall entrust you with that duty for later." "Roger." As the exchange of words concluded, Byleth had noted everyone stopping their note-taking. Finally, in setting aside his previous conversation, he cleared his throat to gain the attention of his class again, and resumed his previous speech. "Right, now that our main topic is done with, Sister made a startlingly desperate effort earlier that I should allow you all to have time off." The class looked at their teaching assistant as she flashed a sly wink towards them. "Regardless, you all have done an exemplary job towards your studies. Seeing as how we are at a good distance when compared to that of the other classes, I do not mind letting you off for this instance. As usual, I will be wanting you all to regularly attend the usual private study with Sister, however that is an issue for later. This month we will be discussing the future of your desired certifications, alongside your graduation plans. Put some thought into it, and we shall discuss it in a few weeks." Byleth signaled to his sibling, and as she took the message, Byleth began handing out booklets to each of the students. Each copy of these leaflets should inform you of the strengths and weaknesses of certain classes. I have already listed my personal thoughts, and even gave recommendations for certain students regarding classes in the extra pages. Do not believe what I have to say is always right, however. Sooner or later, you will all need to debate whether what I recommend is truly correct for you. Regardless, it is time to depart for today. You are all dismissed. Do not waste the time I have given you all, but as Sister put it, kick back and relax." With sighs of relief and smiles of happiness, the class began packing away their belongings to exit their quickened lesson. Almost everyone in the class had a clear goal, except for two certain students. As Petra and Casper left their chairs, they had both desired the same thing. Casper had wanted to continue furthering his combat skills within the training hall, however Petra also had this desire. They both knew that each of them would often do this on their break, and it brought them great discomfort when debating whether the other would attend or not. Both sides had greatly wanted the other to not follow, however that wish did not come true. As Petra and Casper entered the same training room, both of them felt a sense of discomfort right away. Nobody else had followed after them, and they had felt guilty for what had transpired before. The two would first begin by idly observing their weapons. Once that was done, polishing their wooden tools was their main priority. Finally, Petra and Casper had resolved to fight the straw dummies that the knights had placed in the training ground. It was a boring and fruitless endeavor. Whilst they could practice their swings, they knew that this was not what they truly wanted to improve on at this time. What they both truly wanted was a training partner. Petra looked over at Casper. He was busy carrying his axe with him, thrusting it into the empty husk of the dummy. Out of respect, she herself continued following his footsteps with another empty training partner. It was true that Petra had wanted Casper to talk to him, however it was also true that he would flee at the first wave of greeting from her. As such, Petra waited. Unknowingly, she had been taking her swings at a level too harsh for the straw dummy to take. As a few pieces fell on the ground, Casper himself stopped swinging. She was breathing heavily. It looked as if she was frustrated. With a quick flurry of swings, Petra swung, screaming loudly as she chained a combo of strikes. Casper continued watching. She was fast, agile, and quick to think. Each of her strikes transitioned with smooth movements, and the movement they gave had an aura of thought put into them. Brigid was a land known of natives who lived as friends of nature, and it showed with the very princess of said place. Finally, with a piercing gaze made across the dummy's head, Petra jumped back, alerting Casper. Upon doing so, she sprinted with a flurry of movements, until finally a strike was given. The neck of the dummy was thick, yet somehow, Petra had cut it off with nothing but a single strike. As the top flew upwards, it landed on the ground beside Casper. Unlike her previous strikes, Petra had not returned to her starting position. She stayed there, lost in thoughts, whilst taking in the moment of what she had just done. Casper could only admire the supreme handiwork she had just made. He noticed her sword drop to the ground. The wooden sound had made a loud thud as it landed, alerting Petra to escape her position of rest. In following her eyes towards the ground to trace the severed head of the dummy, she had met the hands of Casper, who was holding it. "I guess I'll be careful not to get on your bad side," he said awkwardly. "Listen, Petra, I didn't mean any harm." "I am knowing that you didn't," Petra replied dryly. She pulled her hand out, expecting the head of the dummy to be handed back to her. As Casper slowly pushed his hand to give it to her, she pulled hers back again. "I'm sorry. I am acting too badly towards you." No, I get it." Casper trailed off. "I mean, my dad's a pretty strong general, and he's incredibly rough." Upon realizing the potential implications that Casper was making towards the daughter his very father had slaughtered, Casper stuttered. "I mean it's just that I admired him a lot. I'd be pretty upset too if our fight had ended differently." "You are still not understanding," Petra replied again. Finally, she snatched the dummy away from Casper. "When had we fought? It was never our fight." It was a simple question, however it made Casper think this time before speaking. Gripping his fists in frustration, he looked down on the ground with shame. "It wasn't us that fought. It was our fathers." "You are still feeling guilty?" Petra asked. "Are you not angry?" Casper replied back in haste. Petra gritted her teeth. This time, it was her time to look down towards the ground. She gave a saddened look. "I am not knowing my feelings." No tears came out of her eyes. Instead, she simply closed them. "I was outside of the fighting when it happened. My father died, and it was feeling, not real." Finally, Casper understood every reaction Petra had made prior. He wanted to comfort her, however it would only fail if he were to attempt such actions. "You are also a very kind person, Casper. I feel sad to treat you with the unkindness. That is how I think, and it is a feeling I will always think for a while." "That's stupid," Casper snapped. "Come on. You should be a little angry. I'm from the same bloodline that slaughtered your family. I'm a killer. How could you not feel so agitated? I am confused, Casper," Petra shouted. She picked up her sword from the ground, facing towards him with shaky arms. "You are not the one going through all of this killing. You never did this, but I still feel She grunted in annoyance. Casper followed, and suddenly the mood had turned awkward once again. Seeing her stare towards the wooden sword with confused intent was frustrating. Casper thought back to everything that had happened. Annoyingly, it had never been as if his dad was a horrible person. The matter was far from it. All of this time had passed, and because of a single territorial dispute, the two students had their lives uncontrollably altered without their permission. It was unfair. In looking at his axe, Caspar then peered onto Petra's quivering hands once more. She had her head down in regret. It was clear that with more time that was passing, Petra would eventually leave. He did not want to allow it. Out of foolish determination, Caspar pointed his axe towards Petra. "Head up," he said. As Caspar spoke, he made sure to do so at a slow pace, so as not to seem too forceful. Lances beat swords, they beat axes, and axes beat the lance. That's the weapons triangle we were taught today, and to this day theorists still argue over if it's valid in the first place. Caspar poked his axe onto his friend's weapon, slowly lifting it up to face it towards him. "You have a sword which beats my training axe. Take your chances, Petra. Duel me and we can settle this once and for all." She was slow. Her reaction to vulnerability was delayed, but it was clear that Petra wanted to steel herself. She had gone through a life where events were completely out of her control. Her fate was decided for her, and for once in her life Caspar was allowing her to choose how a matter of urgency would be settled. Whether it was a sign of apology or pity did not matter. Petra did as she had always done. In raising her sword finally, she forced a smile towards her friend as gratitude. Caspar smiled in realizing he was finally doing something correctly. "Yes. I will, then." Caspar swung his axe first, and Petra avoided it and continued the same for her weapon. After an awkward dodge by her friend, the two clashed their weapons together. Not taking a moment to notice one another's facial features, Petra used her foot to trip over Caspar and offset his balance. It worked, and she was able to give a clean strike. Her opponent recovered from this. What Caspar lacked in speed, he was able to make up in strength. The distant sounds of clashing had continued. The two continued their long battle. Even if Petra had been proven to be a better fighter than her opponent, Caspar was able to hold out through sheer stubbornness alone. Without even realizing it, the two had unconsciously smiled in the midst of their battle. Previous conflicts had subsided, and the fight had shifted its aims from revenge towards a simple training match. With the sunset's emergence, the two had stopped their fierce combat to gaze at one another. They breathed heavily out of fatigue. Finally, both parties had finally collapsed. It was a tie. Whilst the conflict would be undecided for now, it had symbolized a new partnership, albeit an unorthodox one. Beneath the settling sun, Edelgard had been busy training with Linhard. Through clenched fists, she had pushed her classmate alongside her in an attempt to make him go through with his assigned punishment. "Ow, ow, ouch!" Linhard winced. "You know you could just let go of my arm now, right? I'm not exactly going anywhere." Edelgard turned her head back, displaying an expression of doubt. "I know you're capable of extending this till the dawn of time. I'll play along with you for now." At this, she was finally convinced. In letting go of Linhard's arm, Edelgard stopped walking. The sky's orange tint had been too dazzling a shade to ignore, and seeing it had awakened the inspired side of Edelgard. Grudgingly, Linhard sighed and signaled for his peer to continue moving on. "We don't have all day. I'd rather get this done quickly, or else I'll spend all night catching up on my reading." Slowly taking her gaze away from it, Edelgard sighed. "I'm sorry. I'm always uptight about everyone fulfilling their duties, that I myself neglect others' thoughts into certain matters. We shouldn't really be spending too long on this. Let's head to our dorms for now." "Oh, thank goodness." Linhard yawned. "I'm glad to see my running away had paid off. I'll be sure to have you make up that time tomorrow." Curses. Further away, they had heard a masculine laughter from a distance. As the duo inspected what had been taking place ahead of them, they could see Caspar and Petra finally catching up to them. "Linhard, I told you she'd find you eventually." Caspar grinned, Petra chuckling beside him. "Yeah, well, I underestimated how much of a liability our house leader would be." Before Edelgard could interrupt out of annoyance, Linhard further inquired about his friend's appearance. "I take it you're coming back from the training hall." "That is correct," Petra answered. "And I'll bet you were on your way to the training hall," Caspar said, jokingly. "That's also correct." Looking back, Linhard thought not to add any further points when seeing Edelgard's bemused expression. As much as she was annoyed, the group's leader sighed in defeat. There was not much Edelgard could do to change what had happened. Misgivings and unfortunate circumstances aside, the sky is pleasant today. I wouldn't mind ignoring my duties just to sit and gaze at it. At this, the class been shocked. Wait a second. Edelgard wants to ignore being up and tight for once. Hey. She snapped. I'm still capable of being at peace as well, you know. The rest of the group chuckled at this. Finally, in recognition of Edelgard's words, they too had decided to give the breaking of dawn a chance. She was correct, it was a beautiful sight to behold. Somewhere out there, the entire batch of students could be staring at these very same skies. Alongside us, Bernadetta, Dorothea, Hubert and even Ferdinand too. Outside could be Claude, Dimitri, Sylvain, Ash, Annette, Hilda Dash. We got the gist already. Don't tire me more than I already am. Linhard yawned. Seeing the sun slowly land itself downwards was odd. To Edelgard, she imagined the progress of the sun reaching its goal just like herself. Slowly and slowly, she would make it towards the future of a better Fodlan. Soon enough, she too would reach her goal in the end, and it was only natural to do so. Speaking of the others, Petra remarked. I would like it greatly for the class to be staring at these skies one day. Also the professors, too. It brings me warmness to think about. The others finally stopped looking as she had said this. They, too, had found themselves agreeing with Petra. Let's be sure to do that one day, then, Casper suggested. Before we graduate, I mean. Sounds like a chore, Linhard groaned. I would like that greatly, Petra beamed. Here, too, Casper agreed. I'd be happy to one day organize such an event before we graduate. Edelgard added to the previous points made. As she saw the smiling agreements of the other students, besides Linhard, she felt a feeling of confidence. I admit, it would be a fun thing to do before we all have our lives changed for good. Edelgard thought back to the teachings they had been shown beforehand, as well as what the class would get up to in the future. Indeed, everyone's future endeavors had seemed too bright a future to ignore. After finally leaving her worries behind, Edelgard remembered a burning question she had for someone. Petra, are you looking to take the certification exams before the end of this month? Petra nodded. It is seeming like a fun event to undergo. I will be gladly taking this opportunity. In fixing her head towards the others, Edelgard knew the rest of the class begged to differ from their shaking heads. Of course they would all have that thinking. Seeing as she and Petra had developed the most of the students in the class so far, the two would most likely be allowed to certify under new classes. All they had to really do was pass the test required for it. I assumed as much from someone such as yourself. Edelgard smiled. If Linhard hadn't been so stubborn, I'd have been hard at work right now, too. Why don't you check the library out, then? Casper asked. I can't deny that my thoughts have been leaning towards that course of action. Maybe I might. She tapped Petra's shoulder. What about you? Looking slightly embarrassed, Petra denied her invitation for a joint study session. Me and Casper have had much of the tiring training. I ask that we do this another day. Of course. Edelgard negated any potential woes that her friend's decline would give. In turning her general direction towards that of the library, she said her goodbyes to the group. Let's all end this year in a way we can be proud of, Linhard included. No need to single me out. Linhard groaned. In saying her final goodbyes for the day, Edelgard left. By now, the gaze of the orange sky had shifted towards a darker shade. Once again, the bells of the monastery clock rang once more. The trio waited for the ending of the sounds, counting the intervals given. In hearing 7 of them, Petra remembered something important. Did Professor Billet not ask us to attend a meeting at this time? Yep. Casper suddenly widened his eyes in a scurrying panic. Oh crap. Immediately, he began making a sprint. I forgot what it was about again. Come on. We'll be late. Choosing to follow behind their friend, Petra and Linhard walked accordingly towards the direction of their professor's dorm room. For a while now, their cheery professor had been gleefully planning something. Seeing as this was the one time that Billet was keen to keep a secret, the rest of the class could only assume it must have been important. Chapter 27, Everyone's Later Ambitions. The certification exams were important to Edelgard. For a while now, she had been studying attentively for it. Edelgard wanted it most to pass the exams. It would both help inspire the rest of the class to catch up to her, whilst also being a marker for how much she had grown over the past month. Even still, she wanted to prove her might as the princess of Adrestia, and to do that would require a great deal of effort. Walking towards her class, she had stumbled upon Ferdinand. Sure, his usual competitive nature towards her was always a struggle to endure, but Edelgard felt like she was in need of it for today. Ever since the day she saw the orange sunset, she had been inspired to give it her all. "Ferdinand, what's wrong?" She caught up to him. "It shouldn't be me noticing you first today, right? I'm sure you've much to say in how you've bested me already." Turning back to her, the noble smiled. "Tease me all you wish, however I shall let you be free for today. After all, it is a very special occasion we should be celebrating." Turning back to her, Ferdinand could see her confused face. Was she set over his neglect of his usual attitude? To try and cheer her up, Ferdinand turned his smile into a darker smirk. "However, if you wish, I can allow you an opportunity to witness my unparalleled skills at a later date, if you want." "I would accept that now, but I have a feeling I'll tire of you eventually," Edelgard chuckled. "Regardless, you're going to need to do a great deal to catch up to me. That's especially since the certification exams are coming soon. Do not think I have not been studying for them. I assure you that where you fall and blunder, I will jump and shine." For a second, Edelgard could have sworn she saw stars on Ferdinand's face. Despite mocking appearances, she knew he was a kind soul. Even if being a royal had slightly boosted his ego, that did not mean Ferdinand was all talk. "I'll look forward to it for now." Walking off into the distance, Edelgard had a childish sense to ask others if they had been studying. It could have been because she wanted to learn about them, or even just a selfish need to see who she was above and below in terms of skill. Regardless, it never hurt to ask. As she jogged towards the class, she found Ferdinand running also. He was faster than her, and eventually Edelgard had tired of trying to catch up to him. "I understand you're relentless in trying to beat me," Edelgard muttered to herself. "But why run so far?" It took a bit of time for her to recover from her fatigue. After she had done so, she continued her usual light jog. It was her mistake to try to catch up to Ferdinand, and especially in a period where she had been tiring herself out from ongoing studies. Finally slowing down to open the classroom door, she saw the class quiet in their seats. Byleth had been busy scribbling something on the board, they were most likely notes. Meanwhile, Billette had an eerie stare being given. Her shoulders rested on the table she sat beside, and she coolly rested her chin across her knuckles with a silent glare. Edelgard felt uncomfortable. Everyone had stayed silent. Not even Hubert was speaking. Something was wrong. As Edelgard cautiously walked forwards, she tried to catch Casper's attention. "Casper, what's happened here?" He did not answer. Giving a quick look at her, Casper quickly returned to his position of attentiveness towards Billette. Edelgard felt a brief shiver. She steeled herself for what was to come, and walked towards her professor. She was not sure if she had done something to upset her teachers, but whatever it was, it would have to be dealt with swiftly. That was her line of thinking. She had far too much else to worry about, and this would not help. "Edelgard," Billette said dryly. Taking out her hands from her chin, she opened and pulled out a lone sheet of paper. "I want you to do some explaining." Finally sliding it across for her student to see, Billette muttered grimly. "You're a monster, aren't you?" Looking over the sheet, Edelgard noticed it had all sorts of information about her. This must have been the official academy records used to track the students' progress, but what was so important about them now? Looking at the sheet, Edelgard noticed the sheet mentioned her dual crests. This however was meant to be a secret. Even if the professors knew, they should have never leaked it out to anyone else. For the class to know this was a dire circumstance in and of itself. Edelgard panicked slightly. Finally giving in, she slid the paper back. "I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. You should be Billette said with annoyance, causing a sigh from her brother. It was an internal secret. Telling people of this would have caused panic and confusion. I'd rather not have gone through with it, Edelgard explained. Please, if I have any right to ask for it, I don't want you telling anyone else. She fully submitted herself as the weaker side of the conflict now. Finally turning back, Byleth tapped his sister's shoulder. She seems desperate to not go through with this. Are you sure you should be disclosing such important matters, sister? Nonsense. Billette slammed her fists across the table. This startled everyone. Suddenly, the entire class could feel the tension. As loudly as she could, Billette hurled her voice with the utmost passion that she was capable of. What's so special a reason to keep your birthday hidden from us? At this, Edelgard paused. Silence had filled the room. As Billette breathed her heavy breaths to recover from her loud boom, her brother simply shook his head disapprovingly. Finally, a laugh came from the house leader. It filled the room with confusion and joy. As Billette stammered to pick up what she should do next, the class found themselves smiling. All of this, and this was the outcome? I wouldn't have thought the day I was born to mean so much. Edelgard smiled. No, that's not true. I feel betrayed. You never told us. Were you expecting it to pass by without an eye's notice? You're one of the worst friends I know. Byleth sighed. I am sure you have met worse people. Shut it, Billette interrupted. What ve you got to say for yourself? Edelgard found Billette's childish attitude to be oddly uplifting. Finally containing her laughter, she realized she had gotten the break she had deserved. Only the Black Eagle's teachers could pull off such a stunt like this. Thank you. This means a lot to me. It better. Billette stood atop the table with quick movements, causing Byleth and Edelgard to jolt back slightly. She pointed her finger towards Edelgard, and spoke with great conviction. I order you as your professor to turn back around. Face everyone with a smile, and receive the highest congratulations you deserve, or me and brother will personally smudge you with compliments ourselves. Suddenly, everyone had stood from their chairs. As Edelgard turned back around, her happy expression only grew with the large smiling faces given of everyone. Happy birthday, Edelgard. In a sudden, confetti had appeared everywhere as Billette frantically ran around spraying party poppers from various areas of the class. As the rest of the students got out of their designated seats to congratulate Edelgard, Byleth had quietly slipped away to bring along the cake Billette had forced her into spending their funds on. As the cake was placed atop the desk Edelgard usually sat within, Billette joined the group. Now you better tell us about your birthday next time. You hear me? Of course, Professor. I'm sorry. It was difficult to wipe her smile across her face. The atmosphere was so contagious, that Edelgard could have sworn even Hubert had brought a faint curve on his lips. Happy birthday. Bernadetta squinted. Celebrate this birthday proudly. Casper advised with a smirk. Don't do this when my time comes around, please. It seems like a hassle. As usual, Linhard sounded exasperated. This is your time to shine. Don't miss it. Dorothea winked gleefully. I shall avoid competing with you today, so enjoy yourself for now, Ferdinand admitted. I give you the wishings for your day of birth. Petra mustered the best she could to speak. Your Highness, this is one of the few occasions where you can truly take a rest. For once, I suggest you do. Hubert approved. You heard them, Billette cheered. Let's have cake and not worry about anything. Oh, and, happy 18th birthday. Edelgard smiled. Thank you, Professor. Although I must ask, how did you realize without me giving a proper prompt beforehand? Oh, funny story, I wanted to take a look at the roster sheets out of curiosity back when the break from lessons was still on, and I stumbled upon yours. Your birthday was 3 days after mine, and that was super cool, so I knew we had to surprise you. I organized everything and even made arrangements with everyone over how I'd plan this stuff out. Wait, your birthday is before mine. Yeah, but we got extra funds from Ria as a gift, so it's all good. The twins had neglected their very own day of celebration to focus on their prized student. Edelgard could only feel thankful towards this. Truly, the 21st of the Garland moon was a special time for her, and she learned it was better spent with others as well. Sister, how did you buy all of these decorations and cake without completely abolishing our funds? Byleth asked, still confused over her tactics. Hee hee. Billette giggled. You see, that shopkeeper, Anna, was it? She gave me a discount after she figured out I was buying for a party. Heck, she was kind enough to throw in an extra vulnerary with it, since she was getting rid of her soon-to-expire stock. I sometimes forget you always choose to buy from Anna before our battles start. I had not considered she would grow closer to you. We see eye to eye when it comes to money. Billette gleamed, gold coins appearing upon her eyes. You forget whilst you may both like money, she is actually skilled in acquiring it. Hey! Billette snapped. The class simply laughed at this. Too many times, the siblings' natural comedy routines had brought smiles to their faces. They could never trade it for any other professor. Okay, forgetting brother's annoying tendencies, I just want to say a serious happy birthday and job well done for both Edelgard and all of us. I know we went through this a week ago, after we learned about that stupid triangle theory, but all of us have struggled, gone through a lot, and in some cases, we've regretted even coming here. Billette had secretly pointed her words towards a select range of the class, but they understood clearly what she had meant. Still, though, that's perfectly fine. We've all adjusted to life at the academy. We're all learning from our mistakes, and even though a month and beyond has passed, I still feel really attached to you all. I'd very much love it if the class stayed like this forever, but I know we'll all grow. As much as I would love for us to stay, I look even more forward to the prospect of an amazing year together. Feeling moved by her speech, the class gave a clapping applause towards Billette. She blushed bashfully and moved away. As Byleth appeared from behind, he made sure to remind the students of their current reality. After Sister had made so much preparation to make you all enjoy yourselves to the fullest, I expect a lot from you this month. Please do not disappoint. The class slightly groaned from this. Yet again, Byleth had hinted towards their certification exams, however this time it was within some reason. They wanted to make it up to Billette. It was clear that partaking and passing these exams would mean a lot to her. At this given opportunity, some of the class finally found their motivation to give their studies a shot this time. All right, everyone, Billette recovered from her stage of embarrassment. What are we waiting for? Let's disperse and have some fun. After a few minutes had passed, the students had naturally dispersed onto their own friend groups. As the twins looked at what they had to work with, they nodded to each other in determination. Their task was simple. The twins had to navigate the classroom, whilst investigating and interviewing the students, asking them about their planned future. They could have done this any day, but seeing as the students had been conveniently more relaxed today, Byleth had only agreed to doing it on this day if his sister were to organize a party. As much as she wanted them all to escape their work today, the certification exams loomed over everyone's shoulder. It was necessary to do this. Who do we ask first? Billette looked ominously over their students. They had each divided into their own groups. If I ask one of them, the others might scamper off. Precisely, Byleth corrected. Start off with Bernadetta. His sister looked over at him in worry. Of everyone, she should be given the most time to prepare. She never will. As much as we can wish for it, Bernadetta will still not be mentally ready if we were to approach her at a later time. At worst, she may run off in a panic. Billette wanted to argue back. As much as Byleth was correct, she wanted most to save the student who needed the most help adjusting to her school life. If it is any consolation, Byleth examined. She is near Dorothea, who will surely assist her in answering. If you want to avoid extra strain, you can shift the conversation to have her answer for her friend instead, or simply make it as quick as possible. That's fair, you sure do come up with a lot of quick fixes, huh? It is my duty, he explained. I see no reason not to. Walking towards her students, Billette had shamelessly crashed into the conversation hosted by Bernadetta and her trusted friend. In return for ruining their previous transaction, she pulled out a glass of flavored juice with a childish smile, and offered it to her students. "Professor Billet, what's up?" Dorothea inquired, somewhat accepting the offer of the juice. "Also, where were you hiding that? I didn't see it anywhere in the party." "Oh, that's simple," Billet posed dramatically. "I call it the Billet bonus. It's what you get as a reward for me crashing your groups." As much as she said this with a vibrant flair, she made sure to quickly return to a somewhat serious attitude to maintain some professionality. As for the drinks, I got them from Anna, but I added extra flavoring from some special ingredients in the cafeteria as well." Can I have some as well?" Bernadetta asked. "So long as you don't run away." Her teacher winked. "Hey, why does everyone expect me to run at the first exit?" Bernadetta snapped. Admittedly, it was the first time Billet had seen her annoyed, but it was too good of an opportunity not to chuckle at. Sorry, I know you're trying your best. I won't tease you about it anymore if it makes you feel better." "It would." "Alright, in return for me not teasing you, I'll get a more happy and cheerful Bernadetta, and in return for me passing you the flavored juice, I'll be able to interrogate you up until I decide you can leave," Billet stated. "As you can see, I'm quite the negotiator. Can I please just have the juice now?" Right, Billet stammered. She had finally progressed the conversation to the point where Bernadetta was not using utterances or pauses in her speech. This at least told Billet that she had finally become a known and trusted presence around her. That was a sigh of relief in her mind, as Billet had been worried for a while that her attitude was too forward around Bernadetta. However, it seemed to be the very opposite. Everyone seemed to truly show themselves around her, probably even more so than her brother. Finally being handed the juice, Bernadetta thanked her teacher. "I appreciate the refreshments, Professor. Usually I'm a nervous wreck in every party or formal gathering I go to, so it's really surreal to have one where I'm actually comfortable." "No worries. It wasn't exactly any trouble at all." Billet magically brought out another glass of flavored juice for herself to drink. Both Dorothea and Bernadetta showed confused expressions, but they accepted that Billet was simply another step ahead of them. "If you're having so much fun at this sort of party, then I should throw some all the time." Yeah. Noticing that her brother was eyeing from beyond, Billet tensed up. She had to quickly make conversation towards her initial goal, or else she would face a series of annoying naggings. "Oh, right, I wanted to ask you, do you have any idea what you want to be in the future? I'm not just talking about the exams soon, but also what class you would like to certify for." "The future? That's a long way away." In completely subverting Biletta's expectations, Bernadetta took a moment of deep thought. Confident ally, she replied. "For now, I was thinking of taking the test for the fighter class next week. Usually they use axes and gauntlets, but I saw you could also pass the tests with archery knowledge. Seeing as that's the only thing I'm good for, I assumed I'd take it and see where it got me." "Only thing you're good for?" Billet inquired. "I'm sure you've got many other talents." No, I mean, I do like sewing and painting in my free time, but I was taught from a young age that those hobbies could only take me so far." Bernadetta thought back, thinking of her father in the process. "It was an accidental shot one day with a bow, but it made my father want to send me here to the academy. I'm not so sure I'd be good at any other weapon, to be honest. I prefer to just stay outside of the enemy's range. I think I'm disagreeing with your father on that one, but it's not my business, so I'll leave it be. Do show me what you make, though. I'd love to see it." Billet quickly steered the conversation back. "Later down the line, once your grades go up and skill improves, I'd assume you would want to become a sniper, right?" "Yes. That was the one I was interested in," Bernadetta answered, surprised at Biletta's correct guess. "Oh, and you're always welcome to see my work. I think I can trust you enough at least." Secretly, she had wanted to thank her professor for the cake Billet always offered her, but she was much too embarrassed to say so. "Can I make a recommendation?" Billet asked, to which her student awkwardly nodded. "If you get an early start on it in the year to learn about riding with horses, you could pass as a bow knight, the ones who shoot stuff atop valiant and gallant horses, whilst making a quick getaway from their enemies. I'd recommend that personally, but snipers have their own personal charm to them as well, especially since they're so secretive and reserved. It might fit with you wanting to hide all the time. I don't want to hide all the time, Bernadetta corrected, however she did take her professor's advice to heart. I'm at a point where it's difficult for me to truly be motivated for my work, so it's tricky for me to take up writing as a secondary subject. Sorry, Professor, but I think I'll need to do some extra thinking on that. That's perfectly fine. I'd personally say that mainly focusing on bows would be a good idea. Later down the line, if you decide to switch, then it would be convenient to ditch it for a bit to do the same for writing. Eventually, you'll be talented in both subjects in no time. Yeah, it's nice to know the option is still there. Thanks, Professor. No worries. If you ever change your mind, then be sure to tell me. Brother may think otherwise, but I firmly believe it's never too late to back down. You could consult me years after you graduate for all I care, and I won't mind at all. This, along with Belletta's usual tender expression, had brought comfort to her student. Oh, right, what about you, Dorothea? Oh, me. Dorothea had drifted off into her own world whilst the two were talking, but she turned bashful when finally being confronted. I think maybe focusing mainly on reason magic to become a warlock might be good for me. As you might know, I've never been too into the teachings of Sirios, so I don't think being a Grimoire is right for me. Still, though you taught me something way back in the Red Canyon. When Edelgard took her sword to strike down that bandit, it taught me just how useful being versatile was. Feeling a bit inspired, I might aim higher, but not in the way you think. Oh, what's on your mind? Later on in the year, the Academy hosts a once-in-a-lifetime competition, formerly known as the White Heron Cup. Usually it has a student from each class compete in a dancing contest of sorts, and the winner can then certify under the special dancer class. Dorothea spoke with passion when speaking of this. It was clear she had put a lot of thought into this matter. Over time, I've found that being quick to react and support myself had always been important for me, and that was especially the case from when I was in the Mittelfrank Opera. Using a sword and carrying magic tomes seems right for me. I definitely have experience from my time in the Mittelfrank Opera Theatre on the art of dance, so I'd say I have an edge as well. Dorothea began to almost plead. I know I've had a hard time learning new things. Being originally a commoner definitely set me back a little, but Professor, I'm sure I can win this. I'm rooting for you all the same. Belette encouraged, however she had to quickly take extra measures if all else failed. Do you by chance have a backup plan? Mortal savant. Dorothea answered immediately. It seems perfect if it all goes wrong. They're typically able to wield reason magic, whilst also being skilled users of the sword. If I could ask you to change my subjects to be those, then I'd be set. Belette thought, impressed by Dorothea's aspirations. Usually people aim for advanced class certifications, but I notice you're going for the master ones. I think that's really admirable of you, Dorothea. Thank you, Professor. I'll try and aim to reach the best of what I'm capable of. All right, I'm perfectly fine with that. I can safely leave this table with no more worries. Before Belette turned away, she quickly mentioned one last thing. Dorothea, if it ever gets too tricky, then always remember you can contact me or brother, and I'm not just saying it because you're a commoner. I promise. We're always here for you. Thanks, Professor. I'll keep that in mind. As Belette said her goodbyes, she looked back at the duo with a smile. She could see them now both talking about their plans, promising one another as friends that they hoped to help each other in battle. It was a wholesome circumstance, and Belette softened up at the sight. That was a surprisingly level-headed thing for you to say. Byleth approached his sister. Unlike Edelgard, who was prepared mentally and physically able to reach to the top of her abilities, Dorothea has only recently realized she can do much more. You comforted her well, and did the designated task I had assigned you. I just don't want her to feel stressed or overwhelmed, Belette answered. That's all there is to it, she answered, relating herself back to her own experiences. Upon asking Caspar, Linhard, and Ferdinand, it was not surprising over who would choose to do what. Immediately, Caspar jumped up in excitement. Despite having to do little thought over this matter, he truly thought his decision was the correct one. "Train me in axe fighting," Casper shouted, unaware of the intensity in his voice. "Do a little of armor training, some other stuff, and a bit of axes, and I'll be a perfect heavy." Heavy. Belette tilted her head in confusion. "You know, the soldiers with full armor and stuff. Super good for protection, although, I hear it makes you slower. Still though, I think I'll get by. With your height, I'll definitely be praying for you," Linhard commented, half interested. "Hey!" Casper snapped. Belette chuckled at this. Seeing this party as an opportunity to do so, she quickly asked the two questions she had in her mind for a while. "Oh yeah, how are you guys so close? You've mentioned childhood friends before, but what's the story behind it?" "It's not too interesting, really," Linhard began explaining. "Our fathers knew each other and were pretty good friends. Living nearby was also another factor, but we were both forced to be together for a while, ever since we were 6 years old." "You don't sound too enthusiastic about that." "It was a chore at first." "Why should I be?" Before Casper could interject, Linhard added his final points. "Even still, there have been some uses out of Casper, and I'd be lying if I said he never helped me out once in a while." His speaking bluntly had calmed down Casper, and as Belette nodded approvingly at the answer she had gotten, she quickly had to ask one last question to her sleepy pupil. "Right, I think I'm down with Casper's idea, but what about you, Linhard? What subjects do you plan on focusing on, and where do you see yourself in the future?" "I'll do exactly what I did all this time ago," Linhard answered. "Which is to only focus on reason magic. I'd much rather do that, since having to spill blood with anything else is far too much for me." "You're still recovering from that blood phobia." Belette thought back to the battle in the Red Canyon. "It was always there, which I'll admit, isn't the best fit when I attend the officers' academy." He seemed undisturbed by the events that had happened prior, which was a good sign for now. "Aren't you going to advise me to also focus on reason magic? You'd only argue with me. I think I'll let you figure things out on your own, but choosing to later certify as a bishop would do you good, methinks. I appreciate the support." He put his hands upon his mouth to stop himself from yawning. "Linhard." Ferdinand finally took to the conversation. For too long, he had been observing the current interaction with Belette and her students. "Do you not think that being a noble qualifies you to try and learn more? You have been given great opportunities from it, so I think it would do you well. It's just a title. I doubt it means I necessarily have to take the paths laid out for me." Linhard put his friend down just as soon as he had risen up. "Very well. I shall respect your decisions." Recovering from his dejection, he faced Belette with eyes of hidden excitement. It was clear to Belette that he was more than ready to answer her ongoing question, so Belette made little effort to hesitate around her most eccentric student. "What about you, Ferdinand? What role do you want to partake in?" "I was thinking about it for a while, and I believe that learning lance training would be the ideal route for me. As an alternative, I would not mind learning faith magic. At least with that, I can then eventually learn to become a holy knight, those who ride horses whilst wielding faith magic and lances." "Oh, that's a good fit for you. Word on the street is I hear you're very passionate about caring for horses, so you definitely have a head start in the riding department." "But of course." Ferdinand chuckled with confidence. "It is a spare hobby of mine. I myself find it quite relaxing." "I can imagine. You should totally show me how you do it. I never was good at horse caring, myself. Anytime you are available, I shall be glad to do so." A face of awe was displayed by Belette. As her moment of being impressed had continued for a far prolonged period of time, Linhard scoffed in order to get her attention back again. Snapping back to reality, Belette quickly jolted upright in realization. "Oh, right, I approve of your choices. Just remember to study hard, and please don't stress yourselves. You don't need to worry about that." "Fantastic." Belette beamed. Noticing she should leave and interview the last 3 students in the class, Belette quickly changed subjects. "All right, I thank you for your time. take these flavored juices I got from Anadesh. Billet quickly handed them the rewards for their troubles, to which they responded with confused expressions. You've all picked excellent choices, so study hard and enjoy this party. I'll look forward to whether or not you pass. Thank you, Professor. Casper and Ferdinand said simultaneously. Linhard simply waved to show his appreciation, but it was clear he still somewhat enjoyed the effort given by Billet. As she left the group to their own activities, Billet had wanted to speak to Petra next. She was moving on to Dorothea's group to start a conversation with them, but was stopped by Billet quickly. Seeing as she was one of the most qualified students in the class, Billet imagined it would not take too long to interrogate her. Yo, Petra, quick question, but what do you plan to study before graduation? Oh? Am I doing the choosing now? Petra asked, slightly stammered at her teacher's quick assault. Yep. Well, I am thinking of becoming a sword master, as they are versatile in speed, and I am feeling a quick strike is a good technique for me. That's a perfect fit for you. Billet beamed. If I may ask, how does learning a bit of bows sound, seeing as that, as well as sword, could qualify you to the assassin class? I had been thinking that before, Petra lamented. Even still, I would be liking it for my focus to be only on swords. I want to become an excellent sword master. And I support every effort you make to become one. Billet patted the head of her student with glee. Right, that's you done, so I'll poof away now. Sorry to disturb you so suddenly. It was nothing. I'm happy to answer your questions. All right, take care. Billet waved to her student, before rushing back to her brother. Byleth had trouble keeping up with his sister. He still needed time to be caught up. I did not manage to hear everything, but is it okay if you report to me the information you have acquired? That's my job after all. Billet answered. As she explained all that her brother was unable to hear, Byleth nodded approvingly at what he was listening to. Finally taking in all of the information given to him, he noted everything down using a pen and paper. He complimented his sister accordingly. That was a surprisingly efficient effort. Thank you. Would you like me to take over for Edelgard? Assuming it is her birthday, I understand I would need to interrupt her at a later point. I think we can do Edelgard and Hubert now, actually. Billet thought. Come on. Let's do this one together. Of course. I will accompany you this time. Going over to the final duo needed, Edelgard cheerfully waved to the twins. Professors, the party is wonderful. Thank you for hosting it. It was all an idea concocted by sister, unfortunately. She deserves the highest praise for it. Byleth corrected. Seeing her bashful face, Edelgard smiled at the care displayed by both siblings. Still, I'm happy you allowed such a party to be held. Usually I'd be against it at all, but having to put so many hours into studying has drained me to a large extent. She is deserving of such gratitudes by her peers, Hubert narrated. Count this as one of the few instances where I can acknowledge your good behavior. Oh. I've gotten praise from Grumpy Hubert. That's a new one. Billet squealed to herself. Thankfully, her brother had pinched her arm slightly to bring her goal inside her mind. Oh right, I wanted to ask, what are you two planning for your future ambitions? I think just telling us your class choices would be a good starting point. The duo of students looked at each other. Both of them had something in their mind, and Hubert had done a mixed expression to Edelgard, implying it was her time to speak what she wished to disclose. I plan a lot for the future. Without combing over my ambitions to a boring extent, I want to change Fodlan, making it a more fair and equal place in the process. She had a lot on her mind. Still, the little context given prior had struck the twins' curiosity. There's much more to that, of course. I realize that with such heavy burdens to carry, I need to stay strong in the process. As such, I want to become a heavy-based knight, an emperor capable of being unstoppable and irreversible in her ambitions. That will be achieved through mastering my axe skills, and in time I'll eventually reach my goals. She spoke with great conviction and stride. It was clear she had planned a lot for her future. Knowing that they needed minuscule worries for Edelgard, the twins could rest easy when it came to their house leader. We'll help you the best we can. Billette supported her student. That's our role, and it always will be. I wonder, Edelgard thought, shadows of doubt relenting her. Will you still be saying that after time passes towards graduation? She faced her head down in minor regret. As much as Hubert tried to signal to her to try and hold her head high, it was of no use. Sister is stubborn. She would drag herself and me along with her to support the people she loves. Byleth reassured. Even if that is not that case, then I would support your ambition as well. Carrying such a large goal is admirable, and I admit even I would not mind lightening such a large weight upon your shoulder. I told you, my role as a teacher will always stay. Even if the role was given to us so quickly, that doesn't change the fact that I really love teaching. Billette put her hand on her student's shoulder. Chin up. Don't be so miserable on something you're not going to face in a while. Edelgard smiled, assured. In saying her thanks, Billette passed one last piece of comfort to her most hard-working friend. Take some of this juice. Usually I kept the flavor a secret from everyone, but knowing you as the birthday girl, I'll let you know what it was. I made it mango-flavored, since word on the street is that our Adrestian princess loves sweet treats. Edelgard displayed childish awe upon Billette's offer. Taking the drink from the hands of her teacher, she quietly sipped upon the drink. To the twins, it looked as if she was a child at this moment. Of course, Edelgard always acted with level-headed maturity and thinking, but in these few simple moments, she could ease herself towards simpler times. Hubert diverted his attention to the teachers after seeing his master more relaxed. I assume you want to ask me the very same thing. His teachers turned to him, nodding in acknowledgement. I plan to solely focus on my reason magic. As much as I am capable of wielding swords, I simply cannot see myself with it on the battlefield. As such, I simply plan to classify as a dark bishop or warlock come graduation time. You are still deciding between them? Byleth inquired. Yes, however it's not much to stress over. You can get back to me later, and I'll tell you what I decide soon enough. In moving away from the group, Byleth quickly returned to his desk to jot this note down. Whilst doing that, Billette sighed at the unawareness displayed by her brother regarding social cues. You're surprisingly nice today, Hubert. What gives? Call it a sign of gratitude for the efforts displayed so far. Keep note that I still don't trust you, but today is a day I can tolerate you. I'll take what I can get. Billette sighed defeated. Noticing her duties were finally done, Billette remembered she still had to discuss everything that had been decided with her brother. Only then, could she enjoy herself later with everyone. Right, I'll see you all later. Have a good party, Edelgard, and try not to stress too hard about the future. I'll come back later to join you all. Saying their goodbyes, Billette left her group and returned to her sibling. Byleth slid the sheets of paper that he jotted down, and the two eventually agreed their students were on the right track for now. The party had been a joy for everyone that day. Indeed, Billette had much to pay Anna later on in terms of debts, but her friendly connections with her had gotten her away for now. After approving of all of the students, she too had childishly brought the class together by offering them a great deal of snacks. Byleth had finally assembled candles to the cake, and as much as Linhard had wanted to get away from the party, even he was curious to decipher what the taste would be like. Dorothea sang a song of happiness for the group, whilst Bernadetta had finally mustered the courage to tell Edelgard a congratulatory message of admiration. Hubert and Ferdinand had trouble getting along with one another, but even still, they had to respect one another for this one day. The highlight of it all was when the candles to signal she was 18 had finally been blown. The childish glee displayed upon their house leader's face was one to be remembered, and whilst she did not believe in miracles of any sort, Billette and Caspar had begged her not to say what she wished for. As a result of this, no one knew what she truly did desire from this day, but the presents given by each student to her afterwards should have surely yielded her results. Needless to say, the class had left with their heads held high that night. Even if what was to come later would be a chain of progressively difficult hardships, the class could still find time to celebrate happier moments of life amongst themselves. As the night loomed over, Byleth found himself restless for sleep. Even if the day's festivities had tired out everyone, Byleth still found himself unable to find a state of unconsciousness. This was always the case with the twins, however it was more so common for Byleth. Oftentimes, his associations with the night were often to do with silence, calm, and nothingness. These connections were based solely upon his insomniac tendencies. It never bothered him that he was unable to truly rest. Simply watching the night pass over was a sight in and of itself. Today, however, he wanted to take a walk. For too long, he had been residing over his work, however just this once, he wanted silence. Suthies was fast asleep, so having less of her commentary was appreciated. Carefully, he exited his room and crept along the monastery grounds, so as not to wake any of the sleeping students. Walking through the halls, he marched upstairs. By now, he did not have a plan of where to truly go, however his mind simply wanted to see where he would take himself, regardless of the intent needed to go there. Maybe for the first time in a while he was finally developing human qualities? No, that was fruitful thinking. Byleth ignored that thought and continued onwards. He remembered that sometimes Byleth had faced insomnia as well, however it never reached her brother's level. In finally deciding to visit the second-floor dormitory to see if she was awake, he stopped by Byletta's door. The lights were off, and through pressing his ear against the door, he could hear silent snores coming from Byleth. As usual, she always slept soundly on the days he wanted to talk to her. After this failure, he began to leave the dorm hallway. By now, his mind was leaning towards heading back. He did not get anything out of this journey, and more loitering would only impact negatively the next day. His eyes narrowed towards the turn in the halls, but a lone voice had broke his focus. "Father!" It was a cry for help. Byleth turned back, dagger immediately in hand. He ran back to the dorms. Nobody had heard the voice, and alerting a mass panic would only cause distractions. He stealthily crept through the dorms once more. "What makes us so special? Why are you doing this to us?" The voice continued. "What did we do to deserve this?" Byleth stopped suddenly. That voice, it was recognizable. Stopping beside his student's dorm room, he waited for any extra movement to be made. Sounds of rustling could be heard, until finally, a girl came out of the door, with nobody of harm near her. Whilst this surprised Byleth, he let Edelgard walk onwards from where she was meant to go. The girl was still fresh in her sleeping outfit, which consisted of a baggy red shirt and trousers. It was clear for once she had not cared for appearances, which was a first for Edelgard. The few things Byleth could truly note, was that she had only slipped on shoes and tucked her shirt so as not to reveal anything if she were to be caught. The most likely scenario now was that she must have suffered from some sort of nightmare. Byleth followed along. It would have looked bad on him to have ignored her, so for once, he decided to intrude upon others. Walking along the halls, he noticed where she was going. Past Ria's hall, and further away from her quarters, was the outside balcony view, the very one she used to stare upon the twins when they had finally arrived at the monastery. She looked out from the balcony, breathing heavily with a face of lament. Byleth stopped running after her. Edelgard had still not noticed, so he decided to approach him herself after he gave her some space. "It seems even on my birthday, I'll always be reminded of those times." Her hair flowed in the cold midnight air. Now, Byleth knew it was his time to approach her. All his life, his insomnia had never been able to help anyone, and for once in his life, it would have some value. Meeting Edelgard in this very moment was some sort of accident, but it was one of fortune. As Byleth approached her, she looked back in surprise. Startled, she flinched back, keeping her head back to avoid the vulnerability displayed from being dressed in her sleeping outfit. The sounds of the midnight owl's cooing had flown in across the distance. As Edelgard embarrassingly tried to look back, the two had faced one another. Finally, braving herself, she decided to talk to her professor. Chapter 28, Her Distant Past. "Professor, you're awake. I always find it difficult to find true slumber. I have been told it is because I have insomniac traits." Edelgard nodded her head in acknowledgement. She was too cold to answer anything. Noticing her shivers, Byleth took off his coat and offered it to her. It was an odd coat, once with cut-out holes in odd places to insert the arms of an individual. It looked strange when worn, however both the siblings had not minded such designs on their clothing. Edelgard took the coat with some hesitation, however she refused any more help given. "Did you hear anything?" Edelgard asked, aware of her screaming. "If you didn't, then that's all right as well." Walking through the second-floor dormitory, I noticed a scream crying for help across the hall. "I followed you out of necessity, to see if you needed help." "So you did it not out of care, but out of duty?" Edelgard asked. She had always been perplexed by Byleth's unusual behaviors, so this did not surprise her. "In a way, yes. Still, though, I would be a fool to neglect a student who cried so desperately for help. No matter what you do, Professor, help would never arrive in the place I was in." Byleth felt confused by this. He had assumed this was some sort of trauma carried by Edelgard, but what about it had made the situation so helpless? Moving forward, he too looked out onto the rest of the emptied academy fields. If Edelgard were to be honest with him, then putting her under pressure was not going to work in this scenario. "I used to be a mercenary." Byleth reverted the subject of conversation. "Some would call me the Ashen Demon. To me, that name never mattered, however I have some understanding that the world is not a perfect place. Even now, I am seeing parts of it. Trauma induced by noble behaviors, bandits flowing across Fodlan as if it is their homeland, and prejudice towards the lower class. I have seen all of that in the time that I have been in this academy." Edelgard nodded. "You're right. Fodlan was never a perfect place." Pushing her confidence higher, Edelgard wanted to talk about something that had troubled her for a while. "The dream I had, it was a memory from childhood. It was one that pointed towards a fate I could never escape, and I've never found a way to get rid of it." "A childhood dream?" Byleth questioned. "I would have thought that the Princess of Adrestia would have an easy life." "Far from it," Edelgard corrected. "I see." Silence had filled once again. With each level of confidence Edelgard had reached, she had to take a moment to reclaim herself. Usually, she always seemed confident enough to give her views on any particular subject. To see her emotions so weakened and distressed must have truly meant something. "You've always struck me as peculiar. I'm sure I've told you that before." "You have. It feels strange to think about, but something in my heart tells me you can keep a secret. You don't seem like the type to gossip out of enjoyment, and I know you're very strict about your duties. I find telling secrets to others to be disingenuous to previous relationships. As such, I try to keep to myself. I suppose I can relate to that." Edelgard smiled, feeling minor joy from being able to project herself onto Byleth. "If I were to tell you about my dream, I want you to promise me not to tell a soul." Finally looking at one another from a respectable distance, Byleth nodded his head. "I appreciate it. Allow me to continue, then. The dream. I dreamt of my older brother, paralyzed, helpless, confused. He shivers sporadically, unable to notice anything around him. My older sister is crying for help that never came. Her dreams and aspirations have crumbled, and she forgets completely who she used to be. As far as I recall, she turned into an empty shell of herself. The youngest of the ones alive is babbling words beyond meaning. He is unable to grapple onto what he loved and cherished. He cries, chokes upon his own words, and breathes at an alarming rate, eventually wheezing heavily as a result. There all of us are, waiting in the darkest depths of the abyss, for the brightest glimmer from outside to come, though, it only came for me. I once had 10 other siblings, with there being 8 older and 2 younger. Do you think you can guess why I alone became the heir to the throne of such a large family?" Byleth stayed silent. For the first time in his life, he hesitated to answer haphazardly. Every last one of them was crippled by disease, lost their mind, or died. By the time it had all been done and dusted with, I was the only one who could take it. I'm the only one left. After things kept getting worse, the darkness kept getting darker, until I was the only one crying in silence. This dream, it's a reminder to never forget such a memory. It's a reminder that I was the only one to carry the burden of the Adrestian Empire, and it's a reminder that the future of the Empire itself, and everything, it all depends on me. For the time she had been talking, Byleth had tried his hardest to not comment on the matters that had distressed Edelgard, however as a result of this, by the time she had finished talking he was rendered mute. He looked down onto the grounds below again. Edelgard noticed he had been silenced. She sighed, returning the coat given to her in the process. I shared more than I had originally intended to. I suppose there is something in the air tonight. Never before have I talked of my past. Turning back, she slowly walked away. Please forget I said anything. It would do us well. She was embarrassed. Good night, Professor. Sleep well, my teacher. Byleth turned back now, seeing her leave off into the distance. He had learned a lot on this night, and it was clear this was information that could disrupt Fodlan as he knew it. As he watched her leave, he hesitated to reply. Looking back and forth again, he finally found the confidence to respond. Sleep well, Edelgard. No reply was given, but the sounds of footsteps had stopped. Byleth stayed still, waiting for a response of some sort. Eventually, a lone voice rang out in the distance, fully somber and sympathetic. Thank you. I'll try. Chapter 29, Humble Haggler. Gerald had returned today. It was strange to think that on the day that the Black Eagles were taking their exams, the twins' father would arrive from his seemingly endless mission. Seath had been strict about the exams. Fearing that the twins would alter their students' results, he had asked to formally supervise their examinations instead. Billette had originally shown resentment to this idea, claiming she had wanted to see her students grow and observe how they handled pressure, but backlash from Seath had made her realize this was a losing battle. Regardless of these circumstances, the twins finally had a day off, and this meant they were free to do what they wished. As per usual, the exams had taken place on a weekend, so as to not fully intrude on the class normal studies. As this was now a typical weekend for the twins, Byleth had decided to spend this time visiting his father. Knocking the door to Gerald's office, Byleth walked in with thoughts filling his mind. After Edelgard had told him that story a handful of nights ago, he had thought to consult Suthies about everything that had happened. If at any time Edelgard elaborated further on her story, he was sure Suthies would be left confused. As such, she was eventually told. Unsurprisingly, Suthies had snapped when hearing of such an event taking place during her slumber. Still, she was quick to forgive, seeing as Byleth had informed regardless. For now, he was advised not to speak of anything that had happened. Even doing so would cause panic if the masses were to find out the Adrestian princess had been through so much. That's the first time you've not greeted me when entering. Geralt examined. What's on your mind, kid? I have been too busy with my duties. As much as sister can handle it, it still leaves me with much to think about. Geralt acknowledged. The two had not talked to one another in a while. It was clear much was missed out on what had happened in a while, and as usual, if they did not have fuel for their conversations to run, then they would forever suffer in silence. This was a common case with Byleth and his father. Despite this stagnation in conversation, the two still carried respect for one another. What's your sister up to? She left to retrieve supplies for our mission next week. Is she doing all right? More so than I could ever be as of this moment, Byleth remarked. She has been in the most positive of moods that I have seen her in. Somehow, I knew that would happen. Geralt chuckled, bringing a slight smirk on his lips. Here you are, mindlessly following along, without a thought to spare. You must tire of it eventually. What is so tiring about being asked to do something? They had had these sorts of exchanges many times before, and it always left Geralt perplexed and stammering. Honestly, I never asked for this when I had you two. What did you expect, then? A normal child, Geralt joked. One that could feel things, but I know it's something you struggle at. Your sister knows the opposite of it, though. She threw a tantrum today after finding out she was not allowed to examine our students in their certification exams. Geralt laughed at this comment. She's very quick to feel close to others, that one. Still though, she is not one to win an argument. Seath had shot her down immediately. He's an odd character, isn't he? Byleth nodded at this comment. His sister. Flayn, was it? She approached me yesterday when I came back from my mission with incredible enthusiasm. Forgetting he was in the same room as Rhea and me, he started lecturing her about how I was the most likely to put her in danger. Byleth showed a face of slight concern at this story, but Gerald laughed it off. I wouldn't blame him. He runs by his own strict rules, but I can definitely see a soul beneath it all. Sister told me that a few weeks prior as well. Byleth agreed. She came to me in excitement, telling me of how Seath had said she was doing a decent job so far. He'll warm up to you. Eventually. He certainly hasn't been kind to me. After my last mission, he wanted me to head back to work again. Honestly, seeing you is one of the few breaks I'll have today. What was your mission? Top secret, kiddo. Gerald sighed. Being the church's lapdog means I've got to pull my own weight to get things done. I got into a fight recently with someone is all. I see no injuries, so I would assume it went all right. You know how it goes. If I'm not happy about surviving, then that could only mean many others died in the process. The least we scavenged was some information on our enemies, but even that feels like we got cheated on. Gerald felt the pressure of what Ria was putting him up to. Sooner or later, you'll get an idea of what's going on around here, or at least I hope you do. I shall keep an eye out. Gerald now swept aside his sheets of paper. From this, Byleth assumed he had wanted to talk of something else. The students, he began. They all came to do their exams, even when it was optional. Seath was incredibly shocked at the sight. Was he now? I can see you two have had a lot of impact on those kids. I'm glad to see you looked after them. A lot happened over the time you were away. I'd be happy to listen to something that won't bore me to death if you're able to talk about it. This was their only true way to pass their time in a meaningful way. Byleth remembered what Suthies had told him, never to mention what Edelgard had narrated on that peculiar night. Remembering that key piece of information, he sat beside his father, readying himself for what had transpired over the course of his time at the academy. His father listened intently, curiosity overtaking him for what his children had been through so far. As the two continued their time of bonding, they had yet to realize the hours flow past. Elsewhere, Byleth had been busying herself for a busy day of prep work. Looking around the marketplace, she had remembered that at some point she was to hire battalions for the class. In greeting the merchant nearby, she made sure to give a friendly wave towards the stark man in front of her. "Hello," Byleth waved. "Here to hire a battalion, miss. I'm a little short on cash today, you see." Taking out her bag of coins, Byleth smiled nervously. "You think you could let me off for a bit?" Sighing to himself, the merchant looked at Byleth with disappointment. "That's a no-can-do, miss. Seeing as a cut of our payments go towards the squad in question that's hired, it would take some real negotiating to get things like that set up. ES are a hassle in general, so I can't really give you any leeway here, unfortunately." "Darn," Byleth muttered. She could already imagine it. As Byleth would be walking back to report to her brother, she would be back with vulneries, training weapons, but no battalion. Just thinking of the potential lecture had sent an electrocuting fist towards Byleth's spine. She sweat herself in a panic, and put her hands together to form a gesture of desperation. "Are you sure you can't spare some generosity?" "No. You people are awfully stingy over something so trivial." The man had now been aggravated, and in giving a grunt, he tried his hardest to maintain his usual mute tone. "You're Gerald's kid, ain't ya?" Byleth knew where this was going. She had been in situations like this before, and every time it happened, not even her brother's quick thinking was not enough to get them out of these situations. "Yes. I am. You're aware of the absurd amount of unpaid bar tabs he has, not to mention his other ES." "Yes, I am." Byleth sighed, defeated. In turning around to accept her meager circumstances, Byleth began to mumble to herself in worry. Of course she had to pay for spending all of her funds on the party, but the punishment was far too harsh. In time, Byleth would learn to never trust her with using their funds again. She could already imagine it. The mere thought of it had sent her into a deep state of worry. "Professor, I'm sorry to intrude." A voice rang from behind. "But would you mind if I help you with this?" She could recognize the voice, but it was a faint one. Turning back around, Byleth saw a silver-haired, meat boy. His freckles and small stature had given him an earnest smile, to the point that Billet was immediately able to feel trust in him. He had been carrying a few empty bags, indicating he had planned to travel to the marketplace to shop for necessities as well. "I'm really sorry," Billet pleaded. "I can't remember who you are, but I feel I've met you." "It's me, Ash." The boy introduced himself. Looking at him more, Billet was still perplexed. "I'm from the Blue Lions class, Professor. We met on the day you were picking a class." "Oh, it's you." The professor displayed a face of realization. "I'm really sorry." "Haha, don't be. It has been a while, after all." "A month or so, yeah." Billet remembered. "Yep, that's right," Ash said, feeling content with the professor finally remembering his face. "Is it okay if I help you hire those battalions? I'm quite good at haggling, you see. I should be able to strike a bargain if I try." "Are you?" Billet displayed a face of admiration. "I used to get myself into that line of thought, but it never worked my way. At some point I just gave up." "Even if you're good, are you sure you can get through that guy's defenses? He seems strong." "Don't worry, Professor. I can take this for you." Clapping her hands in joy, Billet whispered her many compliments to the kind student. Smiling at her gratitude, Ash signaled for Billet to approach the merchant alongside her. "Excuse me, but is it okay if we can talk about my professor's penniless circumstances for a little longer?" "I'm not looking for a haggle session," the merchant said, slowly getting more annoyed. "We won't take very long," Ash assured. "I just wanted to let you know that Professor Billet is one of the new recruits here to teach us at the Officers' Academy, so she's had trouble adjusting here. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm sure she could pay the necessary amount needed for the hiring of your battalion in due time, with your cut coming in later after this month, and the money to fund the battalion could be given up front now." The merchant looked up at Billet, to which she nervously stuttered. "Oh, I can totally do that dash." Being in this situation was more embarrassing than she had thought. "If we need anything else to help seal this arrangement, I'd be happy to give some of my valued belongings, so that it could act as collateral." "Call a what now?" Billet thought to herself, but she stayed mute so as not to ruin her chances of safety. "Look, kid, I see it in your eyes already, you don't plan to move unless I give you a shot. Is that it?" No, Ash corrected. "You could easily get some of the knights to take us away, but I would kindly ask you not to do that. I'm not looking to cause a scene." "Glad you know your place." He now softened his tone slightly. "Still, our professor is still a new recruit. Even if she were to fail her payments, she wouldn't be able to live it down later in her career. I imagine she would risk getting fired if you never let your battalions land in her hands already." "Wait, fired?" Billet shouted aloud, shocked at these new risks. "I can assure you though, that she's one of our most dedicated professors. I'm absolutely certain that she'll pay you back, and even more so aware that Professor Billet will never want to let this happen again." He had made a convincing argument. The merchant gave another loud grunt, as if to say he needed a moment to think to himself. As Billet and Ash looked at one another in suspense, the merchant took some time to wander elsewhere in the marketplace. He had a deep conversation with one of his colleagues, and after seeking his approval, he returned with a slip of written paper in hand. "Out of curiosity, the collateral, what were you planning?" "Oh, about that." Ash rummaged through his pockets, finally pulling out a book with a gold-painted casing. "This book was given to me as a gift from my father. I've cherished it for a long while, but seeing as I know I'll get it back again to read eventually, I'll gladly give it just this once." The merchant reached his hand to look at it, and Ash placed it accordingly. Flipping through the pages, the merchant muttered to himself, as if he were a checklist ticking off a certain criteria. "Lug and the Maiden of Wind, it's an old folktale. I'm pretty sure this stuff's sold to children." He examined the pages further, eventually letting out a voice of impression from it. "The page quality, and the way it's presented on the cover. This stuff's the stuff they sell to the high and mighty." "It is," Ash acknowledged. "I've loved those stories ever since I was a kid. It's actually what got me into reading in the first place. My father gifted that to me on my birthday, before I went to the Officers' Academy. It means a lot to me." The merchant was clearly convinced. In passing his slip of paper that he had been holding onto, he handed a pen to Billet. "Sign this," he ordered. "The kid's honest, so I've another reason to not like seeing you failing this agreement." "All right. I'll make sure to make the payments next time." Signing the slip, the merchant grinned to himself. It had been a while since he saw such honest clients, and it was a fresh sight. Looking at the book, he smiled at Ash out of kindness. "I'll make it my duty to keep this safe. You have my guarantee that I'll pay you back, should it be harmed." "Of course." Ash nodded. "Word of advice, though, don't give this thing away to every merchant you see. I'm aware of the dangers out there, but I appreciate the warning." "Right." After this exchange had happened, the merchant had asked Billet to describe the battalions she had originally wanted. After doing so, he gave his assurance that it would be made possible. "All right, that's it for this session. Get out of here before I have my regrets." The duo nodded, gave their thanks, and left the stand in relief. Finally being out of earshot from the merchant, Billet felt herself floating from the shackles of lectures her brother would have given her if she had failed. "Thank you so much, Ash. I really appreciate it." "It's nothing, Professor. I'm always willing to help someone if they're in trouble." The boy smiled, earnestly. Thinking about the rest of the supplies that Billet had to get, she also remembered Ash had been carrying bags of his own when she met him. "Is it okay if I accompany you with your shopping? I'd feel bad if I wasn't of any help." "Oh, are you sure? I need to see Anna later today, but she usually goes out of town on weekends," Billet groaned. "I'll need to do a bit of walking around to find her." "That's a coincidence, Professor. I was heading that way, too." "That works for me as well, then." The two had noticed their paths going the same way together, and so they continued on the road towards the town outside of the monastery grounds. Much to Biletta's happiness, Ash had been willing to bribe for more than just a few battalions. Many times, Billet had to offer up an apology, to which Ash would nervously laugh and act bashful. The two had slowly made a good partnership with each other. A while had passed now. With the sunset beginning to show, Billet had panicked. Realizing she had not been keeping pace, she remembered that the merchant, Anna, had been waiting for her, expecting repayments soon for the birthday party that had been organized. "Ah, Ash, I forgot I needed to repay Anna for organizing the party." "Party?" Ash questioned. "Forgive me for asking, Professor, but is that why you were so strapped for cash today?" Hee. Billet looked away in embarrassment. "Our house leader had her 18th birthday a week ago, so I wanted to make it special for her." As she explained this, she was unaware Ash had been displaying a face of awe. "I kind of spent most of our funds for it, though, so it's only now I'm paying the price. I don't think I've ever heard a teacher do something so forward with their students. I've never really had a teacher before, so I wouldn't know." Billet put her fingers below her chin. "I'm just trying the best I can. It's what I've always been doing, really." "That's really admirable, Professor. I just want to be the best teacher I can be." Billet realized. "I'm sure you want to be something like that, too." "Oh, me?" Ash asked. "Yeah. Is there anything you want to be when you grow up?" Billet eyed her friend out of childish curiosity. "Come on. I'll keep a secret." "It's not really a secret exactly, Professor," Ash smiled nervously. "I've always dreamed of being a knight. I used to read those kinds of stories as a child, and it always inspired me." Realizing he must have given a wrong message across, Ash quickly rephrased what he truly meant to imply. "I mean, it's not for the fighting. Really, Professor. I want to help people, and I want to protect them when they need me most. That's what I think a true knight is, like Lug was in his many tales of bravery and intrigue." Billet giggled at his passion. She too could find some sort of relatability in Ash's goals, and she gave a tender smile at her friend. For a long while, she had wondered what it was she was truly doing. Eventually finally finding the thing she loved, Billet had promised to herself that she would try her hardest. "That's really sweet." Thank you." Ash smiled nervously. "The truth is, Ash," Billet admitted. Fighting was never one of my biggest enjoyments as a mercenary. Being a teacher really makes me feel like it's the right job for me, and even if it is just brother doing the paperwork, and the lectures, and everything else, I really enjoy connecting with the students and helping them. I think, it's just like you. Taking a moment to think over what she had just said, Ash nodded his head in approval of what Billet could interpret of his dream. He remembered the man who had helped him get into the academy. It was his father, Lonato. Come to think of it, Billet was the one whose class was sent to investigate his actions later this month. Noticing this, Ash felt tense. She was such a kind individual. Surely, she would succeed in hearing him out. Way back then, Ash had tried to contact Byleth, but it only ended with a failing outcome. Billet was much easier, considerate, and open about these topics. This was enough to give him some ounce of hope. Stopping in their walk, Ash tugged on Bilet's shoulder. "Professor, I wanted to ask you something." Anna's debt had completely left her mind now, and Billet turned back out of curiosity. "What's up?" He was fully tense now. The same thing was happening which had happened with Byleth. This time though, Billet was not the one walking away. She was willing and ready to listen. Deep down, Ash knew her kindness would make her stay as long as he needed. Gulping at this realization, he prepared himself. "It's a big favor to ask, Professor." "Oh, is it?" She replied out of curiosity, but noticing he was now looking down in shyness, Billet tried to hush her happy tone. She stayed somber now, being fully aware that she was going to be entrusted with something important. "Ash, I know I'm not part of your class, and I know I might not have a right to badger you to tell me, so I'll wait here as long as you need until you're comfortable doing so." His eyes widened. "Really, Professor? I told you, I want to be the best professor I can be. If that means waiting a century to help a student, then I'll gladly do it." "You're too kind." "Nonsense." She swiped her arms, jokingly. "I just want to pay you back for haggling for me." She made excuses, but Ash was sure she would have done this regardless. He thought back to his life. It was one of duality. He had worked so hard to truly make a living, until he had been adopted by his father. Lonato was a man who Ash knew always cared for him, but somehow he had gotten himself involved in a dark conflict. Ash wanted to save him, to help him, to ask him why he was doing all of this. That was why he had to seek Bilet's help. If he never did, then this would always tug at his heart for years to come. "Hey, come back here." A man had dashed between the two, pushing them aside. Billet had fallen to the floor, and as Ash quickly helped her back up, he looked onwards to see a live robbery taking place. Beside them, an angry, yet quick merchant had been chasing him. She looked back. Understandably, the lady had a sour face on her. She had pinkish-purple hair, which had been tied back. Alongside her black trousers, she wore a fancy white shirt, with a dark crest symbol atop the middle of it. She must have been an esteemed merchant to have been wearing such clothing. As Billet got up and recovered from being knocked out, she recognized the merchant. "Anna?" Billet asked. "What's up?" "That man stole my most prized book to sell. Catch that thief. Cut that man in half, like my prices." Anna bellowed, sending a flinch towards Billet. This was the most angry she had ever seen her. "Please calm down, ma'am," Ash pleaded. "You calm down, kid." She was in an angry panic. "If he gets away, I'll be making a huge loss today." Billet looked towards the direction that the thief had run away in. Much to his dismay, the alleyway he ran across was much too difficult to make headway. Noticing this also, Ash tugged on Billet, completely forgetting what he was going to ask. "Professor, please take this." He passed his almost emptied bag of coins towards his friend. "I'll compensate for the book." "Wait, what dash? Are you serious, kid?" Anna asked. She was initially against it, but realizing the financial struggles of this scenario, she quickly averted her stance. "I mean, no complaints here, but I can see that it takes a huge amount of kindness to do something like that." "After I catch him, he'll pay me back," Ash said. "I just want to know why he did this, and then I'll decide his punishment." Anna took the gold in relief, but Billet was still not yet happy. Ash, you still had to tell me something. I'm sorry, Professor. I really wanted to speak to you, but I need to ask you to wait, he pleaded. I know all too well about running away from stealing, so I'll be able to know how he thinks. Please allow me to take care of this, and I'll be forever grateful when you hear me out later. There was much more to that story than Billet could comprehend. As much as she wanted to inquire about this, she nodded her head in acceptance. Understood. I'll wait till forever long at the monastery gate. Meet me there once you're done. Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate everything you're doing for me. It goes both ways. She thanked back, earnestly. As Ash ran off, Billet wished very much for his success. She muttered words of encouragement for him, but she knew he was unable to listen to them. Unknown to her, Anna had eyed her ominously. Now, Billet, the birthday funds. Her pink eyes flashed in childish greed. She had already been compensated, so this meant she could get back to business. You got them yet? Whenever money was involved, Anna would always forget whatever was going on around her. Adesh, she chuckled, noticing her dire circumstances. Ash was not here to help her, and by gosh, her family knew she was bad at haggling. I'm screwed. Eventually, Ash had found the thief. Finally confronting him, he found out the reasons for his actions. After hearing him out, he pardoned his actions and let him be free of guilt, still giving him a warning in the process. He knew he had to explain what happened to Billet, and she would potentially report it to the church if she brought the situation up to Seath. Still, he remembered the life he once had, one where he too was just like the thief. Lonato helped find his footing, and he owed him a great debt. Oh, right, Ash muttered, walking back. I hope Professor Billet is still waiting. He never got a chance to tell her of everything that had been bothering him. Soon he would succeed. This entire month, he had been trying his hardest to make it possible. Now, he had his chance. Walking back, he saw the stalls and shops slowly close, alongside the playing children heading back into their own homes. The bell tolled, and the lights had slowly shut. How many hours had he been away for? He would be surprised if Billet had waited all this time. Finally returning to the gate of the monastery, he saw her hair flowing alongside the cold midnight wind. She turned back, doing her usual tender smile. So many times she had done this, but it always never failed to look sweet and earnest with compassionate intent. Readying himself to tell her of everything, Ash began to describe what had happened. Professor, I want you to do something for me on your next mission. It would mean a lot to me if you did. What I'm about to ask, it's about Lonato, the man you're going to be facing soon. Chapter 30, on her honor as a professor. The bell tolled its usual toll. The late evening had arrived. As the class sighed in relief, Seath coughed to gather everyone's attention. The examination was finally over, and now whatever efforts the students had made to try and pass the certification exams would be permanent. I will now begin collecting your papers. Please finish writing your current sentence and close your sheets. They did as Seath commanded. Whilst this happened, he added one last comment. Well done, everyone. I'm surprised that everyone could make it today, since normally only a select few students attend their examinations during the first months. Whilst I would think that it was the efforts of your professors that convinced you to join, I shall leave your test results to truly prove that point. Tensions were high as he said this. Just now, the class had realized that their efforts were the very ones putting their professors on the line. Regardless, they had tried their hardest. Whatever mistakes they made now, the students had only themselves to blame. As Seath collected their papers, he flipped through them. Acknowledging their efforts, he dismissed the class. You may now leave. The sounds of chairs screeching and moving had echoed across the class. As the students nervously left, they all breathed a heavy sigh of relief. I honestly can't believe everyone came here. I was surprised. You talk a lot for someone who never attended our lessons, Linhard. Edelgard mouthed. As a few students laughed at this, Casper had to ask the eventual question. So, who here thinks they did well? I mean, I know some of us all did different papers, so I can't speak for all of you, but mine was all right, I think. It was Bernadetta squeaked. Okay. I mean, the questions were made to be tailored for different weapons theorists, so I was lucky to have only studied for the bow even though we were told to go through the whole of the course. I think I did alright as well, Edelgard assumed. I just want to move forward with this. Failing would only delay my progress. Those are words of truth, Petra agreed. Of course you two would pass, the class muttered, realizing they were the hardest workers. Edelgard, Ferdinand bellowed, pointing his hand at her. I hope to best you. We classified for different things, though dash. Let that not stop us from being ranked. I will prove my strength through these exams. If you say so. Sighing out of fatigue, Edelgard simply walked on ahead, leaving Ferdinand silenced. Almost all of the class had spoken up about their thoughts, but one had scattered from the group in the instant that she had the chance to do so. As Dorothea left for a route of solitude, 2 other students had taken notice. They followed her out of curiosity. She wanted to be alone right now. Dorothea walked past the halls, the nearby cafe, the gardens, and finally looked across the bridge near the monastery church. The view was incredible from below, and she found that it helped ease her worries. She had tried her very hardest to commit to these exams, and yet she still struggled with them. Why was it this way? Was this cycle to only continue forever if this was the hardest she could achieve? Dorothea. She looked back, seeing Bernadetta with Linhard beside her. She wanted a polite way to tell her to go. Thinking of something suitable, she had yet to fully acknowledge her friend. You told me you wanted to run to your room after your exam, right? It's only right that I don't keep you away for too long, so don't worry about me. And nobody's here, so I can stay for a bit, Bernadetta lied, still worried over new arrivals. How did yours go? I dashed thinking to herself, she could only close her eyes in regret for not preparing hard enough. It went fine. Oh, but you studied so hard for it, so I'm sure you did well. She wanted her friend to leave. Sure, she knew that Bernadetta was used to having to live up to a pressured lifestyle, but this was a different case. She simply let time pass, hoping her friend would submit after taking a hint. She just wanted to be alone. That was what Dorothea desired deeply. She wanted to view the sunset once more, to feel her aura of solitude, and to regretfully sleep with nothing but sorrow filling her mind. The false words of others could not help her. Sorry. Feeling nervous, Bernadetta turned back. I'll go now. As she began to leave, Linhard stopped her. Seeing the scenario go out in silence, he too walked towards his classmate in an attempt for assurance. Your best friend just tried her hardest to comfort you. In my eyes, it appears as if you're discouraging her from ever trying again, which we both know isn't good. I want to be alone, Linhard. Frankly, so do I, but that doesn't mean my time in solitude is thought to be better spent in regret. He spoke with the most stern voice he had ever spoken in his time at the academy. Whilst this startled Bernadetta, she stayed, hoping that his words would reach her. If you feel it was difficult, then you simply need to forget about it. I tried so hard, Linhard. So did I, but truth be told, I too had a difficult time of it. Saying this had caused Dorothea to look back. You wouldn't lie over something like that, right? Never, he corrected. I was told constantly, from the professors, and more importantly, Edelgard, but still, I never bothered to truly dedicate myself to studying reason magic out of a lack of personal interest. I assumed with my usual intellect, I could pass. I feel that didn't work out quite the way I wanted it to, though. And you're just going to ignore it. She finally stood up, facing her friend. You're going to run away, pretend nothing happened, even if you've doomed yourself. Yes. Why? Dorothea pleaded. She was heavily confused, but she wanted to know more. Because life would forever be spent in sorrow if you chose to simply keep everything close to your heart. He stated it plainly, but it had hit a chord with his friend. Fail or pass, you earned a well-deserved rest. You, me, and Bernadetta need to do what we love usually doing. Simply because we had gotten through a tough challenge. His words weren't completely right. Many times in her life, Dorothea had tried running away, but it never worked. Still, hearing his words made her want to believe once more. She looked up, but could not produce words to voice her opinion. Realizing this, Linhard signaled for his classmate to leave alongside her. "Come on, Bernadetta. We did what we could." She looked back at her friend, but then nervously followed. Turning back, she had to voice her last thought, no matter how measly it may have been. "I know I'll never have the right to know more about you, Dorothea," she admitted. "Still, I want you to know I'm always there for you. Next time I see you, I'll pretend nothing happened for you. I promise. We can return to how things were, so just don't stress. You've always got another chance." She had tried her hardest to speak with her, and Dorothea knew that. Just for once, she wanted to believe in her friends. At least, she hoped so. It did not matter if she passed the test, right? Feeling somewhat relieved, Dorothea decided to retreat back to her dorm. Only time would tell how those examinations had gone. Elsewhere, Billette was still waiting for Ash to explain everything to her. She was surprisingly patient. Ash had never met someone much like her. The earnest smile given by her had never wavered, and not once had Ash felt pressured that she was desperate to know. True to her word, she would always be willing to listen, no matter how much time it would take. As Ash steadied himself, he gritted his teeth, trying his hardest not to be overly emotional. "Professor, no, Billette." He looked back up to see if calling her by her first name might have offended her, but seeing her nod in acknowledgement told him he could continue. "I want to personally ask a favor of you." He stopped again. Now, he was steadying his emotions. He didn't want to cry, nor did he want to shout, and he even more so did not want to force anything on her. Still, one thing was true, he was desperate to ask for help. "I'm sorry." Now she had to react. Billette calmly started moving. Her entire venture today was only possible through Ash, and she wanted to pay him back. Approaching him, she kneeled down slightly and put her hand upon Ash's shoulder. "I'm here for you." Her voice was soft, like a mother comforting their child. "You can tell me anything, but at the same time, you're not entitled to explain yourself for today. Don't feel obligated to pressure yourself. I need to though, Professor. Hey, now." She took her hand from his shoulder, and finally took off her coat. "Let's do this. When I'm with this jacket, I'm a professor, when I'm not, I'm just a girl called Billette." "Professor, isn't it cold? Billette likes the cold," she fired back calmly. Billette dislikes formalities, overly long expositions, and needless bloodshed. Much like everyone else, Billette desires friendship and warmth, and she herself wants to help anyone no matter what, especially the students from the academy. Ash stammered. She did it to help him. The wind had grown colder, and whilst Ash had his hoodie underneath his uniform to help him withstand the weather, he noticed Billette still shaking from the weather. Still, she withstood it for him. Why? Why is it that she demanded no pressure, but she had done so much to make him feel guilty if he never told her in the first place? She did so much, and ignored so much, all so she could listen to a student who she did not even teach. "Take a deep breath," she suggested. "Tell me what you want, and take me where you wish. I'm here for you." "Thank you, Professor. Slowly and slowly, he was calming down. Where should he start, though? Perhaps he should tell her of his attempt to speak with Byleth, or his relationship with Lonato. No, what about the very beginning? So many options had appeared in his mind. Eventually, Ash had decided. He steadied his words to allow Billette to follow his direction. Earlier, the bandit had needed the book to sell for money. I finally caught up to him, and he told me he had wanted it to cure a sick relative of his. I felt inclined, and so I gave him the funds needed to help him out." Billette listened attentively. "I know it was probably a ruse, but I couldn't help it. I had once been in his state as well. Billette, there was a time I used to steal and lie and cheat my way through life. I had siblings, and parents who had died of illness at a young age." He had to think back for a second. Despite showing a face of sympathy, Billette still remained eager to give the boy time to talk. "I did everything I could to support them. Life as a commoner was difficult. Eventually, it had been natural for me to do all of that, up until I met Lonato. I suppose I should explain that story to you, right? Well, when I was 9, I snuck into a rich noble's mansion, wanting to look for anything of value that I could find to sell. He managed to catch me. It was not because I was foolish, but because I had submitted to him by the time he had caught me. As if he were leaving a cliffhanger to a story, Ash once again stopped speaking. These memories had linked with what was happening now, and had started flooding his mind. He was scared, but also nostalgic for the days he could not live again. If I may ask, how did he catch you? Billet gave a prompt this time, wanting to make sure Ash would not lose his footing. Oh, right, he stammered. I saw the cover of Lug and the Maiden of Wind. The cover was finely printed, made of gold, and it was too amazing to behold. It's the exact same one I used as collateral earlier today, actually. Ash remembered that his father had eventually properly gifted the book to him before he left for the academy. I hadn't seen anything quite like it, and I was going to steal it eventually, but by then, Lonato had already entered the room. Billet could only guess where the rest of the story had gone. As Ash paused again, he gestured for Billet to put her coat back on, to which she had refused. He let me keep the book, Ash continued. I'd never received so much kindness in a long time back then. He just smiled, provided me with food, and then opened his arms to me, as if to say, "It's okay now." As Ash narrated this final part, she now realized the weight of this conflict pulling on Ash. To think, after all of this, after opening his arms to me and my siblings, who were nothing but thieves and beggars, he was able to become a father to us and take us in, despite already having Christophe, a son of his own. Ash had stopped again, but Billet needed to ask something now. A thought had been weighing on her mind for a while now, and she just needed to clarify this fact to make sure it was genuine. He's the one inciting the rebellions, she spoke slowly. The man we may have to kill is Lonato. Yes, Billet. It was happening again. Slowly and slowly, Billet was beginning to have trouble establishing between good and evil. At this point, she was speechless. Finally putting her coat on, Billet spoke. Ash, I'll do anything I can to help you. He noticed her changing of attire. I mean, Professor, but he's your enemy. My enemy's adoptive son is also my friend and partnering student, she answered immediately. Ash, would you like to come with me? He stammered, and widening his eyes, he could see it. A fire had awakened inside of Billet's eyes. What was this? This had to be the most serious he had ever seen in her. Reports of her cheerful demeanor had never included this side of Billet, so was Ash the first to ever see this? Professor, Ash, speaking from experience, I hate being forced to do things I never agreed to. I'm not going to offer my hand again, since I want to respect your boundaries, but it's up to you to accept my offer. Billet listed out the rules first, before laying down the consequences of his potential actions. Come with me, and you and I will experience something completely gross to us. Choose to stay, and you'll avoid seeing your father as a monster. But Professor I want to believe that, too. Billet looked down on the ground. There are good people in this world, but there are also weak ones, and strong ones. There are people who can be influenced, and some who can lose their way. This was a strange thing to narrate. Ash had to wonder where Billet had gotten this speech from, as he knew little of how Billet had seen the changes portrayed by Costas on the Red Canyon. But even still, there are those who, when offered, they can turn back and walk a different direction. I believe that with all my heart. Billet looked up, marched towards him, and put her hands hardly on her friend's shoulder. Whatever you choose, Ash, I swear on my honor as a professor that I'll do whatever I can to help you. Her eyes, fierce as an enraged lion, her grip on his shoulders, as hard-pressed as a seal on a letter, and her aura, as commanding as an army officer. All of these things about Billet in this very moment had resonated with Ash. He felt assured, but scared. So many emotions had swirled inside of him, that he had to cry, smile, close his eyes tightly, and hide his face in shame. Finally letting go of his shoulders, Billet gave a warm embrace. A hug, signaling warmth. It was one Billet had to do. It was one she did to tell Ash everything would be alright. It was one Billette did to help her friend express his emotions. "Come to me whenever you wish, Ash," she spoke warmly now, and the fire in her eyes had extinguished as she closed it in loose thoughts. "I'll pull the strings, and I'll tie the knots needed to get you to our class for this single mission. All you need to worry about is whether you want to come or not." "Thank you, Dash," he cried, and cried, and cried. "Thank you so much." Opening her eyes again, Billette could only lament over what Ash had been through. To go through most of this month, and to have been ignored and rejected accidentally by Byleth. He had gone through a lot, and only now could Ash seek the closure he had tried so desperately to grab. Billette felt happy for him, but sad over these circumstances. Had she never been there, would Ash have stayed quiet? She could see it slowly tear away at him. Billette did not want to imagine such a grim circumstance, for she was glad to have offered her arms to Ash. Just as Bernadetta had convinced her that the Black Eagles were truly the right class to teach, Ash had made Billette realize that being a professor at the academy was the role she felt she was born to do. "I'm going to do whatever I can to help," she stated once more. "Remember, my honor as a teacher is on the line." She meant these words even more now. With the realization that she loved teaching, Billette smiled. For the first time in her life, she realized what she was capable of. She was going to help those who needed her. No matter what the cost, Billette would assist everyone. She had to. It was a large gamble, but it was one she would take any day. "Thank you, Professor," he sobbed, continuing. "Thank you so much. Check the description for the links to the author."